Soldiers of the most powerful army in the world march in triumph, watched by warriors in medieval battle gear. They swarm after the French and let fly a volley of arrows. One pierces the thigh of a French officer, and the horse archers carry him away in their retreat. The prisoner frets and whimpers throughout the night, convinced by paranoia that the archaic projectile has poisoned him. His captors are not highway bandits, but warriors of the Bashkir people, serving the Russian Tsar in the fight against Napoleon. Their renowned bravery notwithstanding, the Bashkir contributions are of little import at this stage of the war. Napoleon has just put to flight the Russian army at the Battle of Friedland, and the Tsar is compelled to make peace. While the French Empire solidifies dominance over much of Europe, the Bashkir warriors ride back to their corner of the Russian Empire, to their herds of horses and warm yurts. Long ago, nomadic horse archers like themselves built the great empires of the Huns and Mongols. The Bashkirs will meet the army of Napoleon again in much larger battles. And steppe warfare will be properly tested against the firepower of a modern empire. The invasion of Russia is coming. In history, a society is often pushed to innovate when their enemies acquire powerful new technology. Well, now we've all stumbled into a digital battlefield, where hostile data brokers scrape and sell our personal info. Incogni is the innovation we need to fight back. Incogni doesn't only help stop those annoying robocalls, which is great, but remember, data brokers can access info about our health, relatives, social security numbers, you name it. You might have heard that someone in Michigan bought info from over 50 people on one of those people finder sites, then opened bank accounts in their names and took out $200,000 in loans. And scammers are getting more sophisticated, even using AI to impersonate people and contact their family members. I had no idea how much I needed Incogni, but as soon as I signed up, I saw they already contacted hundreds of sites with my info and were actively getting it removed. And if you still find your info on a website, you can use the new Incogni custom removals tool to request a removal. So take your personal data back with Incogni today and use code HISTORYDOSE at the link in the description to get 60% off an annual plan today. Some 600,000 men follow Napoleon into Russia. They pass deserted villages and farmland committed to the flame. The Russians have left them neither supplies nor sustenance. After a vicious battle against the Russian army, Napoleon and his depleted forces conquer a smoldering and abandoned Moscow. The Tsar has summoned hundreds of thousands of Russian subjects to repel these invaders, among them a great multitude of irregular cavalry. These include the Kalmyks, a Mongolic and traditionally Buddhist people, as well as the Cossacks and Tatars, and of note are the fearsome Bashkirs. With the culturally linked Mesheriak people, they contribute 10,000 warriors. The Bashkirs patrol the devastated countryside, tamping down unrest. Some glint in coats of mail and steel helmets, carrying rifles and pistols, while many go to war with simpler gear, a cap and robe, and a bow slung behind them, with lances and swords at their sides. The call to arms will reach the yurt of a man named Janturi. Like other Bashkirs, he is a Muslim who was raised to ride horses and to meet his enemies with bravery. And so the Bashkirs now ride to war, asking for the blessing of Allah. Some chant a battle song. We shall show the Russian realm, we shall show the whole world that the hand of the Bashkir Batir, armed with hardened steel, will drench vast fields with the blood of French enemies. And yet, it is not a great battle, but rather a want of provisions in the looming winter that drives out Napoleon. In October, his failing army begins the long retreat. They drag through oppressive cold and snow, and suffer black and windy nights, their trail harassed by enemy Cossacks. The soldiers perish by the tens of thousands, while some fall into enemy hands. The invasion has cost Napoleon 500,000 men. Napoleon has not lost his resolve. Even as a new coalition forms against him and the Russian army marches west, the Emperor reinforces his ranks with hundreds of thousands of conscripts and launches the 1813 German campaign. That summer, Jantiuri and his wife find themselves on a long and sweltering ride to the battlefront. Thousands of mounted Bashkirs trample over the land in large war caravans. Such mass migration comes naturally to those of nomadic and semi-nomadic origin. Some Bashkirs travel with their spouses as well as yurts, and every man brings a reserve horse for sustained transportation, or if needed, consumption. The warriors also draw spiritual encouragement from the mullahs, Islamic clergymen that accompany each Bashkir unit. Islam first took root among some Bashkirs in the early 10th century. The Mongols arrived centuries later, and the heirs of Genghis Khan scattered and decimated the tribes who stood against them. But in time, the Mongol overlords of this Western Khanate came to embrace Islam. So too did surviving Bashkirs, their faith deepening and language changing as waves of Muslim Turks settled in Bashkiria. And so, in the meadows and forests of their homelands, these Turkic-speaking Bashkirs persisted. It was the desire to retain these lands and other privileges that compelled some Bashkir chiefs to swear allegiance to Ivan the Terrible in the 16th century. Thus, the Bashkirs entered the Russian orbit. So it is that centuries later, Jantiuri and his Bashkir brethren ride toward Dresden in the service of Russia. At some point during the campaign, he and some 50 men are posted away from the main detachment to act as watchmen. They soon detect a party of French heavy cavalry. Arrows fly and steel clatters. Jantiuri drives his lance through a foe, but the French cuirassiers begin to overwhelm the Bashkirs, and Jantiuri is struck down by a blade to the shoulder. Jantiuri recalls, "When I came to, I saw that half of our comrades had been killed and the rest were tied up. My wife wasn't near me and I thought she was dead. We were mounted on horses and taken as prisoners." Over an hour passes in captivity. Then the earth begins to tremble. A charging company of allied Don Cossacks appears. The riders rout the French and save the Bashkir prisoners. Riding alongside the rescuers is the wife of Jantiuri. She had escaped the attack, alerted the main force, and rescued her husband. Still, in this age of firearms, modern units determine the course of war. Napoleon triumphs at the Battle of Dresden. Much of the victorious French army encamps around Dresden, while week by week the coalition amasses their forces. Skirmishes break out here and there along the front. Colonel Marbeau, a French light cavalry officer, demeaningly notes the presence of Bashkirs and Tatars. Our soldiers were not in the least alarmed at the sight of these semi-barbarous Asiatics, whom they nicknamed Cupids because of their bows and arrows. But Marbeau admits that the Bashkir raids succeed in creating controlled chaos. They buzzed around us like a swarm of wasps, flying all over the place and being very hard to catch. The attacks by these barbarians were incessant, and the Russians supported them with detachments of hussars to profit from the confusion which the Bashkirs could create at various points on the line. Most notably, the Bashkirs enthrall Napoleon Bonaparte himself, who stops on a hill to marvel at the approaching horse archers. The curious emperor wishes to meet them. Marbeau writes, "To this end I ordered 2 squadrons of my regiment to hide behind a clump of trees, while the remainder continued their march. The Bashkirs continued to follow the column when they were unexpectedly attacked by our squadrons, who falling on them suddenly killed a great number and took some 30 prisoners. I had these brought to the emperor, who after examining them expressed his surprise at the spectacle of these wretched horsemen, who were sent, with no other arms than bows and arrows, to fight European soldiers armed with sabers, lances, guns, and pistols. When we got back to the camp, my chasseurs amused themselves by giving wine to the Bashkirs, who expressed their joy by such extraordinary grimaces and capers that all the watchers, including Napoleon, were in fits of laughter." Though the Bashkirs provide Napoleon with a moment of pleasant diversion, the war is not finished. And to the Bashkirs, their continued wartime efforts hold great political significance. They had not always accepted Russian rule. Even as a multitude of Bashkir tribes paid tribute to the Tsar, they remained largely autonomous for 2 centuries. They wintered in their villages and migrated in the springtime, and practiced beekeeping, hunting, and gathering. The Bashkirs were spared the toils of serfdom endured by other Russian subjects, but their fortune changed in the 18th century. Increasing state intrusion brought Russian forts and waves of settlers onto their once communal lands. Their pastures fragmented, fewer and fewer Bashkir families would undertake the old migrations. Some would begin to settle into sedentary lives on farms. And outside of Bashkiria, the state impeded the construction of mosques and confiscated the landholdings of Muslims who did not convert to Orthodox Christianity. The furious Bashkirs joined several rebellions against the Russian state, but imperial armies crushed these and devastated the Bashkir population. It was at last the more measured hand of Catherine the Great that began to genuinely integrate them. She granted power and status to Bashkir religious leaders and promoted tolerance of Islam. In so vast an empire which extends its dominion over such a variety of people, the prohibiting or not tolerating of their respective religions would be an evil very detrimental to the peace and security of its subjects. The Bashkirs were expected to provide troops for the Russian army and organized to that end. For Jantiori and his people, the present war against Napoleon is a chance to prove themselves to Tsar Alexander and the rest of Russia. The Bashkirs are among the 500,000 men who will converge at Leipzig. There, on October 16, 1813, the Battle of the Nations begins. To this point in history, it is likely the largest battle ever fought. Guns roar and men fall by the thousands. On the 18th, Marbeau and his French cavalry are caught amidst the sea of troops. Facing a terrible cannonade and continual attacks, the French line remained steadfastly in position. Towards our left, they were assailed by a charge of more than 20,000 Cossacks and Bashkirs. With much shouting, these barbarians rapidly surrounded our squadrons, against which they launched thousands of arrows, which did very little damage because the Bashkirs, being entirely irregulars, do not know how to form up in ranks. In such disordered clusters, the Bashkirs awkwardly attempt to fire over one another. Their compromised aim prompts Marbeau to assert, in fact, the Bashkirs, having no other arms, are undoubtedly the world's least dangerous troops. While the French cut down many Bashkirs, Marbeau soon faces their unfailing spirit. The more one killed of these wasps, the more seemed to arrive. Thus, one of my finest NCOs had his body pierced by an arrow which entered his chest and emerged at his back. The brave fellow, taking 2 hands, broke the arrow and pulled out the remaining part, but this did not save him, for he died a few moments later. Multiple horses and men are wounded by the Bashkir volleys. Marbeau looks down to find an arrow lodged in his own right thigh. The carnage rages on until the coalition at last wins the Battle of Leipzig on the 19th. In the coming months, the coalition forces advance into France and take Paris, while Napoleon is exiled to Elba. The Parisians are mystified by the sight of Bashkirs, plodding through their urban centers with bows and arrows, and pitching their yurts on the outskirts of the city. Jantiori later recalls that the women of Paris were so beautiful that his wife forbade him to walk the streets alone. The eventual return and final defeat of Napoleon brings his era to an end. The Bashkir horse archers themselves had not significantly altered the course of the war, but they had earned the respect of Tsar Alexander. He visited Bashkiria in 1824, dining on traditional Bashkir fare in a village and praising the people as valued members of the Russian Empire. Passing through the meadows of Bashkortostan, the Russian writer Vasily Zafirov and his guides come to a yurt camp on the forested edge of a river. The elder Bashkir, whom they've come to visit, welcomes the travelers inside, offering them each a pillow to sit on and a bowl of fermented horse milk. He shares that he has a wife and daughters who are skilled horse riders. When Zafirov notices a coat of mail in the yurt, the elder laments that Bashkirs no longer wear this sort of armor, which he himself wore so many years ago. The old man is named Jantiuri, a veteran of the Great War against Napoleon. This is 3 hours of my brother Joe illustrating a Bashkir rider. We're just a two-man team. Joe manually does all of the art, editing, and music, and I do the research, script writing, and talking. If you want to help this kind of work survive on YouTube, go to the Patreon link in the description. Thank you.